G'day guys, Chris Torrey here. Today I'm going to take you through why Hawthorn have made the mistake of the millennium. And the mistake, of course, so you're not left in suspense, is of course Hawthorn's move on Alistair Clarkson. So for me, it's very much comparable to Jerry Krause's decision to move on Phil Jackson and decide that the 97-98 season is his last year as head coach. So for some insight into Jerry Krause, so he's actually, from a scouting perspective, a personal hero of mine and someone I've actually learned a lot from. So he's someone where he'd sit aside from other recruiters, really take his own notes and not take part at all in the groupthink. And as a result, of course, he was responsible for, although Michael Jordan was already drafted before his time, he was responsible for the drafting of Scottie Pippen and Horace Grant, which was a key to their initial three-peat. And of course, in the, recruitment, or the drafting firstly of Tony Kukoc, and then the recruitment of Dennis Rodman. So really, in terms of that list management side of things, he's really as good as I've seen. So, but of course, on the relationship side, that's a complete another story. And his sheer arrogance in thinking that without Phil Jackson as head coach, that he would be able to, ensure Chicago's continued success into the future, which of course did not happen. So the story was, before Phil Jackson, Chicago, although they tried and they really played through Michael Jordan, they couldn't succeed. So that's the quick story of that. Phil Jackson comes in, implements a new offense, it forces them to share the ball around, and it really enables the other players to develop. And of course, what's the result? Phil Jackson in one season, then the next 3 seasons, you've got 3 championships back to back to back. Of course, after that, Michael Jordan's away for baseball, comes back in that last little bit of this season here, but of course to no effect, getting knocked out by the Orlando Magic. Then again, you've got another three-peat. So in their final season, 97-98, what we've got there is Phil Jackson, before the start of the season, is told, this is your last year coaching. So, and of course, you've got ownership that could have said no to that decision, but they decided to trust in Jerry Krause's judgment, which, of course, as we now know, is a mistake. So, and as everyone knew at that time, well, if Phil Jackson is leaving, Michael Jordan was very vocal in saying, well, if he's out, I'm out. And of course, you've got Scottie Pippen, who he was contracted to really a long-term contract, but he was getting paid really nothing significant. So he was very frustrated by that situation, and he always wanted his money. And given Phil was leaving, Michael was leaving, and he'd never been paid his money that he felt he deserved, well, of course, he left as well after that 97-98 season. So without, of course, your championship coach, and without really the 2 stars, and really you could say 2 of the very best players in the NBA at that time, well, of course, they were never going to have success after that point, regardless of the wonderful scouting and recruiting moves and whatever the case may be from Jerry Krause. So as we can see in the years following that final championship, well, absolute nothing seasons, they couldn't even make the playoffs. So that was pretty disgusting. And of course, since then, well, they've never made it back to the NBA Finals, despite how good those Derrick Rose Bulls were for those years. Of course, they couldn't even get through. So we've got a bit of context there. And just to quickly take you through the roster. So you've got Jordan, Pippen, they're the stars. Rodman, Kukoc, Harper was pretty good. Kirk could hit threes. That's what you had. And then after that, of course, well, you've got Kukoc and you've got Harper left. So Brett Barry comes in reasonable, but yeah, nothing fantastic. So of course they couldn't bring in the key players, because what haven't they got? They haven't got the coach, and of course they haven't got the star players to really attract other name players to come aboard. And that's sort of the key component here that I'll be going through in a moment, that's missing from Hawthorn's premiership puzzle going forward. And then, of course, the following year, well, you've got Chicago Bulls number 1 pick Elton Brand. Well, he doesn't move the needle either. So unless you're getting a LeBron James number 1, it's not really going to turn around your championship fortunes all that easily. It's not a guarantee having the number 1 pick, even in the NBA, which is a 5-man game, and certainly in the AFL is a 22-man game. Makes absolutely no difference getting the number 1 pick. So moving on. So the other situation, there are some similarities to, of course, is Collingwood's decision at the end of the 2011 season to, of course, transition into the Nathan Buckley coaching. So the arrangement was after that season, you'd have Moldhouse staying on and then Buckley taking over as coach. So that was decided before the 2010 season that that process would occur. And of course, after 2011, Moldhouse decides, I can't do this. I can't work with Nathan, so I'm moving on. So, but that's his call. But ultimately, this group was a Mick Moldhouse group. So you had Pendlebury career season. You had Cloak with a career season. Lumumba, well, he loved playing under Mick. You've got Ben Reid, career season 2011. Particularly during the home and away season, he was an absolute monster. Dane Swan, Brownlow had his best year in 2010. Chris Tarrant playing great footy. Cracker came back, he was handy. Leon Davis had the best career. He had really a career year in defence, and of course after this season retired. Just sort of feeling he was getting disrespected in terms of what he was being paid, and had Mick Moldhouse stayed on, the word was he would have accepted that same deal. So we've got Dale Thomas after 2011. Well, he wasn't the same player, but 2011 career year, absolutely dominant then. Alan Didak, he had his career year in 2010, but really after that really dwindled off in a hurry. So Tuvey, he was really good in 2011, but again, after that dwindled off. Maxwell declined after that as well. Heath Shaw, he clashed with Buckley. So you've got all these stories where it's just a case of they were Mick Moldhouse's team. It didn't work under the next coach because ultimately it was working. 2011, Collingwood actually had the highest ever in AFL history percentage season. So, and the only team they lost to, and funnily enough, they lost to them each of their times playing them, but it was Geelong. So, yeah, phenomenal season, that 2011 season. So, and coming from that dynamic, well, of course that didn't work. And in the Nathan Buckley era, although he was a reasonable coach, well, it didn't yield a premiership, of course. So, of course, that would be looked at as a failure. And in hindsight, of course, you'd say, Mick Moldhouse, you stay on, coach this side for another 3 or 4 years, then we'll decide after that if you want to stay on or who we move to if we move to another coach. And of course, now moving on to Hawthorn and Alistair Clarkson more specifically. So if we look at his successes over the year, so before him, of course, we had Peter Schwab, who did the best he could with what he had access to. So that was reasonable enough. But from there, of course, Clarkson comes in, turns things over, really sets things right. So you can see really immediate progress, and it's gradual progress. And then, of course, in a short period of time in 2008, with what is actually quite a young team, they happen to win a premiership. So superb stuff there. Make a grand final again in 2012. And then, of course, you've got the three-peats. So Hawthorn, absolute juggernaut during that era, and really taking Hawthorn from where they were, which was really a nothing team from nowhere for quite a long time here, where really before they weren't really successful since sort of, you could say, 94. And sort of before then, that's when they had their great era. And of course, they had that sort of long extended lull until really Clarkson came in and sort of righted the ship. And of course, with Clarkson, the key points are he's a coach who is still motivated to coach. And he never at any point lost the playing group. They still really play for him, despite really, I guess, at this point of their journey, a relative lack of talent based on, I guess, not all that much in terms of youth, given they really traded all those first round picks away for so many years. So, and if we look at Hawthorn's finish to the year, well, superb finish. So they finished with a draw to Richmond. Well, that's still terrific given what Richmond have done in past years, even if they did drop off a lot at the end. But they beat Bulldogs, sensational. They beat Collingwood, they beat Brisbane as well. So not losing in the last 4 games with the lack of talent Hawthorn had. Hawthorn should really be a bottom 3 team on talent. So with Clarkson being able to really, I guess, achieve to that level, well, he deserves to be applauded. And for me, the mistake is it's not Clarkson that should be going. It should be Jeff Kennett who's going. And if Sam Mitchell can't work under Al Clarkson, well, I'd say he can go too. Because with Clarkson really still being arguably the best coach in the competition, and given what he's done over the years, I'd say that's pretty clear cut. Maybe some might say Damien Hardwick, and those that say that, fair enough. But if I could have any one coach in the competition, and I'd say most teams would be saying this, they'd be saying, yeah, we'd take Clarkson if we can. So, but of course it comes back to Jeff Kennett's vision of you don't want one particular coach in place for too long. But my opinion, of course, is very much contrasting to that, where if you've got a coach that still remains probably the best in the business, well, there's absolutely no reason to turn them over. This isn't the US presidency. It's a very different scenario. But perhaps we could have limited terms on the present presidency, and maybe that might turn things around. Although I'd say there is still merit to keeping presidents on too if they're good. But of course, with Kennett for such a long time wanting Clarkson out, finally getting his way, I do think that's a mistake. So just with Clarkson, and we can see with all the clubs really that are getting rid of their coaches, well, who's the first number they're calling? They want Clarkson. So yeah, it's pretty obvious that he's the coach to have. And again, given the lack of talent Hawthorn have on their list, it's just incredible seeing what they've really been able to do even this year under a Clarkson, and find sort of the players they have and really develop them from nowhere. So yeah, for me, big mistake. And just to give you a bit more as to what I see Hawthorn's future looking like without Al Clarkson. So, of course, by having arguably the best coach in the competition, what does that bring to the table? So, you're going to have the best assistants wanting to work under him. So, whether it's former coaches from other teams wanting to work under him, or whether it's the best up-and-coming potential coaches. So, of course, under Clarkson in past years, you've had really a conveyor belt of some of, or I guess the highest number of developing coaches for that matter. So who would go on and become future coaches of other teams. So losing that sort of draw card, well, you're not going to get the best, whether it's assistant coaches, development coaches, fitness staff, because when you've got that ultimate coach, well, you attract all those other components that want to work with him. So that's fantastic. And same goes with players. Well, Hawthorn, well, without Clarkson, the key message there is, well, they're not going to be a destination club. Who's going to put up their hand to say, as a free agent, I want to go to the Hawks? Or if you're looking for a trade, let's say to a Victorian team, well, you're not going to have players nominating Hawthorn as their team of choice anymore. Or certainly not to the same frequency. We can say that pretty clearly. So with that in mind, and look, Sam Mitchell, for all we know, might become a very good coach, maybe even a premiership coach. But if you're comparing someone who may be a good coach to someone who is probably still the best coach in the competition, well, it's a pretty obvious move. You don't move on the premiership coach who has won 4 premierships in his time and made the 5 grand finals and is helping you even still with a pretty limited playing list at that, perform beyond the level of talent there is on the list. So, and really, I guess, have that high level of morale and competitiveness from week to week. So, yeah, so if I was in charge of Hawthorn and I had my say, I'd be saying, Jeff Kennett, see you, mate. And Sam Mitchell, if you can't work under Clarkson as an assistant, or whether it's VFL coach for Box Hill or whatever the case may be, you can go too, because we're going to be able to attract other really formidable assistant coaches or development coaches or whoever. And by retaining Clarkson, well, we're going to continue attracting really good players from rival teams, even as a team that really has, to some extent, really bottomed out and no longer has those, I guess, core sort of premiership components to the team, you could say. So, yeah, for me, it's a pretty obvious move. And for me, it's the mistake of the millennium, and even more egregious, frankly, than Collingwood's decision to move Mick Malthouse on, though you could say that isn't too far off, and particularly given the circumstances of Collingwood as that, I guess, premiership contender still. But for me, Clarkson is on another level to Malthouse. Maybe some disagree, and that's okay. And Malthouse was a great coach for that Collingwood group. But of course, as we saw with his transition to Carlton, well, he's not the right coach for every team. But Clarkson, wherever his future may be, if he joins, whether it's a Carlton or Collingwood, maybe he waits a year and joins another team. Well, I'm really confident that wherever he goes, he'll have success and bring with him the best assistants and be that draw card for opposition players. So, yeah, for me, huge mistake, Hawthorn. And if you could turn it around and, I guess, change your mind, I'd be doing that. But, yeah, it looks like it's too late. So, sorry, Hawthorn fans. But if you enjoyed this video, make sure you give it a like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. And, yeah, let me know in the comments section below. Would you prefer keeping Clarkson as coach of Hawthorn, or would you be moving on Kennedy and Mitchell if you have to? What would be the right choice? And if you could have Alistair Clarkson be the coach of your team, if you support a team other than Hawthorn, well, would you do that? Would you switch your current coach over and bring in Clarkson if you could? For me, as a Collingwood supporter, the answer would be pretty clearly yes. It doesn't matter who the other applicants are, Clarkson would be the guy I'd be bringing in. So my take, but yeah, I'm interested to hear yours. Anyway, guys, see you in the next video. And for those of you who have stayed beyond the end, I thought I'd also give some insight into Al Clarkson. So in 2013, I was fortunate enough to actually get the opportunity to walk into the Hawthorn Footy Club and meet Clarko and meet Hodge. So, and one of the interesting things I found out about Clarkson that I wouldn't have known otherwise is he's a San Antonio Spurs fan, for those basketball fans out there. So, and a big influence for that was actually Jared Ruffhead. So a number of the Hawks players during that era were Spurs fans. So that got Clarko on board. And yeah, it would be interesting. I didn't go into too much depth because he was pretty tight-lipped into, I guess, how much of an impact how the Spurs played under Pop had on him. But I can't help but suspect there might have been a bit of coaching influence and a few learnings that Clarko would have taken out of the great Coach Pop and some of his ideas.